Page 17. Reflect the Jews as a supportive audience such as social welfare liberalism. But it is also true that those objectives are most cogently and convincingly added when they are conceived in aid of the primary agenda of the Jewish Political Association, for example, poverty as a racial phenomenon related to bigotry, or lending itself to dangerous political extremism, or offering a value-compatible opportunity for coalition. In other words, the Jewish Political Association in America is not a political party meant to reflect all the prevailing political opinions of American Jews. As a political association, the Jews are primarily concerned with the flourishing survival of Jews and Jewish institutions in ways that are acceptable to Jewish values. The organized network which comprises their political association is their instrument for that purpose. As a supporting audience, American Jews are deeply involved with many other political associations and movements which have other primary objectives. But this is precisely one of the strengths of the Jewish population in America, and, finally, one of the strengths of the Jewish Political Association itself. A political association can be better than the sum of its parts, depending on how well organized it is, but it is finally limited by the aggregate influence that can be wielded by its members. The aggregate influence of its members is the base on which rests the strength of the Jewish Political Association and Jewish political influence. And that aggregate influence is based finally, not so much on political activism relative to the Jewish agenda, but on Jewish activism in general American public life. In the 1981 National Survey of American Jews, only 8% said that they had been active in some political campaign, but 39% said that they had been active in a professional association, 36% in some community cultural group, 21% in some neighborhood organization. In addition, as many or more Jews had been involved in a business organization, a PDA, a feminist group, an environmental group, as had been involved in a political campaign. And most of those who had been active in political campaigns had been active first in one or more of the other community activities. In other words, Jewish influentials develop out of integrated activism in general American life. To put it another way, the influence of individual Jews is not primarily created around issues of the Jewish agenda, which emerges from the Jewish Political Association. It is more often created around issues on which the Jews represent a supportive audience. The result, whether in creating Jewish influentials or productive relationships with other groups, is to give the Jewish Political Association its base of strength, as it enters the political arena on its own agenda. In turn, the organized elements of the Jewish Political Association give these influential Jews an organizational base, a clear Jewish agenda and a consensual. Page 18. Message to bear. In that formal political arena, electoral activity is a critical activity in solidifying access to public policymakers on the agenda of the Jewish Political Association. And lobbying is a critical activity as it assesses policymaking strategy, often under changing conditions, and helps to organize and inform policymakers on the spot around that strategy. In their various ways, the electoral activists and the lobbyists are connected to and essential to the Jewish Political Association and relatively powerless without it. And the entire Jewish Political Association is only marginally more powerful than the aggregate influence of American Jewry and Jewish agencies, mainly gained through integrated activism on the general American public scene. A cautionary note. As an antidote to intoxication, it is always worthwhile to note that the formal expressions of the Jewish Political Association, even if financial contributions are involved, will not be determinative if there are major countervailing factors. There have been a few instructive signals on this matter, as it applies to American support of Israel, when the Carter administration became party to a Soviet-American communiqué, which promised to bring the Soviet Union into the forefront of Middle East negotiations. The American Jewish apparatus erupted into what was called a firestorm of protest. The proposal was dropped, and Abba Eban, for one, declared that the American Jewish protest had carried the day. Subsequently, at the beginning of the Reagan administration, the organized American Jewish apparatus again erupted in at least as rousing a firestorm of protest with respect to the AWACS sale to the Saudis. But the AWACS sale prevailed. All kinds of analysis can be applied, but the fact remains that it was a difference in circumstances, not a difference in Jewish effort, which distinguished the failure. In 1983, the Foreign Aid Bill, the largest portion of which was designated for Israel, was voted against by a significant number of congressmen who were traditional supporters of Israel and who had received substantial amounts of financial contribution from Jewish sources. it was not critical. The aid bill won, and the congressman in question who voted against it because of a Central American provision typically said that they would have sought some other way of making sure that Israel received its funds. However, the American Jewish apparatus had fought for passage of the bill, which had a number of favorable provisions in it for Israel. And some of the larger contributors to the congressman in question were semi-privately outraged by the delinquencies. But the efforts of the Jewish Political Association, including its page 19, electoral and lobbying activities, will not prevail against overwhelming American tendencies in an opposite direction. The basic American commitment to Israel, for example, had its wellspring in the middle 1960s, not on the basis of a post-World War II sentiment for Jewish refugees, but on the basis of a growing perception of American self-interest in the integrity of Israel. That commitment, which has not changed radically since, was based primarily on objective conditions before the Jewish Political Association seemed to acquire the influence it has today. Of course, the Jewish Political Association has still had a critical marginal effect on certain important policy decisions, but the marginality itself suggests that the Jewish political endeavor must not become so narrow that it does not consider some of the larger issues which will bear on the Jewish agenda. In the matter of Israel, for example, America's general foreign policy, rather than sentiment on Israel itself, may eventually determine America's policy towards Israel. And a major divisiveness between haves and have-nots in America, rather than any specific constitutional sentiment, could eventually determine the state of America's civil liberties. The narrowing, both with respect to the above cautionary note and with respect to the kind of integrated activism which has made the Jewish Political Association influential, observers have noted a trend of ominous narrowing within Jewish life. There are two interconnected ways in which this narrowing has developed. There is a tendency towards one-issue politics. Note that the fastest-growing American Jewish organization by far has been the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC. And there are other tendencies towards self-ghettoization on the public affairs scene. Note how often non-Jewish public officials over the age of 50 frequently complain about the narrowing agenda they have perceived in the organized Jewish community. There is evidence that the Jewish population at large has not become as self-ghettoized in public affairs as has the Jewish organizational apparatus. Its voting patterns on issues and candidates, as noted earlier, indicate a group pattern of broader concerns. Also, the general activism of Jews continues to manifest itself through the disproportionate number of individual Jews involved in a broader range of general community activities and associations. It is suggested that there is a certain growing discontinuity between the American Jewish population and the dominant sector at the organized Jewish apparatus. More and more dominantly, the center of that apparatus has been the fundraising agencies of the Jewish community. The Council of Jewish, page 20, federations and the local federations. Their major efforts in fundraising were associated with Israel, culminating in a massive increase in 1967. These central fundraising mechanisms increasingly drew in the cream of affluent young Jewish leadership. The preoccupation of these mechanisms and their leadership with Israel was understandable. The leadership of AIPAC and the pro-Jewish PACs in America have been drawn from the same circles of leadership. Of course, other developments were taking place on the American scene, which promoted Jewish segregation. Much has been written about the way the interests of the Jews and some of its former group partners on the political scene seemed to separate. But the point is that the growing edge of the Jewish apparatus became increasingly and markedly one issue in its approach to political life. A smaller and smaller proportion of young Jewish influentials in the apparatus became activists in general community life. Even so, this trend towards self-ghettoization among these Jewish elites does not create a current disability for Jewish political effectiveness, as long as there are no serious political problems for Jewish issues. The fact is that at the end of 1984, there are no such serious problems on the surface, despite all the foreboding which Jews are wise to have. American support of Israel is more secure than it has ever been, as this is written. American politicians are publicly committed to Israel, and the American public remains highly sympathetic towards Israel. Anti-Semitism is at its lowest level in the century. Even in those cities where anti-Semitism has traditionally been spawned, the phenomenon is muted because of the sympathy towards Israel in those circles. and there has been no break in the strength of American civil liberties. As has been indicated, there is much concern among Jews about the Christian talk that has surrounded church-state issues, and the legislation and the Supreme Court have been loosening the strictures against church-state separation that existed a decade ago. While this may be a matter for serious Jewish political attention, there is no indication that the American people or politicians will stand for much more than a cyclical overadjustment to the strict constructionists of a decade ago. As long as these circumstances prevail, the political power of the American Jews will not be seriously tested. Within a climate of strong American partisanship towards Israel, for example, a difference can be made in this case or that with one-issue activism. But life for American Jews can get qualitatively stickier. American support for Israel is based on perceptions of American national interest, which can change. Contemplate the possibilities of diminishing Israeli power in the Middle East, especially with accompanying economic problems. Page 21. Diminishing American power in the Middle East, economic problems in America, a more non-interventionist American foreign policy. Under such conditions, it becomes clear that American Jewish political effectiveness will depend not on marginal political clout, nor on Israel-related activism, but on general Jewish influence in the political process. And such influence will not finally be just a matter of political mechanics. It will also be a matter of the perceptions and the values with which American Jews will impress on that process and on American policymakers. None of this is meant to disparage one-issue organizations such as AIPAC and their efforts, which are important and effective in the present situation. But if a serious assessment is to be made of the possible needs of the future, then it must include the apparent decline within the heart of the organized Jewish community of non-ghettoized activism, with which the Jews have most deeply affected the political process in America. Summary and remedies. Most of the developments on the American Jewish scene do not threaten Jewish political effectiveness in the foreseeable future, or at least they need not. But some of these developments may not be benign if certain characteristics of Jewish community and political life are not maintained and, in some cases, restored. The chief remedial characteristic of Jewish public affairs activity is its non-ghettoized activism in American life. Such an integrated activism can turn Jewish population dispersion into a positive factor by extending political effectiveness into new areas. As a deliberate policy, the organized Jewish community would do well to buttress this possibility by giving more support to new Jewish enclaves outside the traditional areas of Jewish concentration and fundraising. Extreme measures of electoral reform, such as preponderant reliance on government funds for political campaigns, could certainly impede the political effectiveness of American Jews because of a direct effect on an important aspect of their activism. Such extreme measures will not be easily legislated by elected public officials. On the other hand, the Jewish community should be more actively and constructively interested in this area of public policy. Reforms that prevent abuse and scandal could also prevent the enactment of extreme measures down the road. However, the current reforms will not impede the political effectiveness of American Jews in the face of their continued activism. The effect of mandated proportional representation in political life has already received attention, but should be included in a larger context, that is, as not just an abstract matter of quotas, but a matter affecting the quality of the political process. And the issue of the Electoral College is, page 22, not a burning one, since the Electoral College vote and the popular vote have come to coincide, but the Electoral College has served to dramatize the activism of Jews in certain states, and as one American Jewish Congress official once commented, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." The apparent weakening of those networks called political parties in America will also fail, in current circumstances, to undercut the political effectiveness of American Jews, as long as their activism is maintained and intensified. Indeed, the existence of relatively autonomous political campaign centers lends itself to more effective grassroots activism. However, there should be an active Jewish interest in strengthening the resultant networks. Furthermore, the Jewish community should have an active interest in maintaining the strength and compatibility of that political network in which it has politically thrived, the Democratic Party, whose exact thrust and characteristics for the immediate future are problematic. But the effectiveness of Jewry on this score depends not only on general activism, but on specific emphasis on coalitional activity with other traditional constituencies of the Democratic Party network, at least in those areas where Jews are concentrated. At the same time, it should be noted that, while the democratic difference of the American Jews returned full force at the polls during this past election, there appeared to be a more organized activism by ideologically interested Jewish sectors within the Republican Party, at least at the presidential level. The volatility of both party networks at this particular time suggests that this development could be a positive factor, as long as the common Jewish agenda, in its larger framework, is restored as a lively and fruitful dialogue within the Jewish community. In sum, while the current developments on the American scene raise certain public policy concerns to which the organized Jewish community should give attention, the main threats to Jewish political effectiveness probably lie within the dynamics of that Jewish community itself. In ways that have been discussed, there is a tendency towards the self-ghettoization of Jewish public life. Connected to that trend is the tendency to develop one-issue organizations and mentalities. And connected to that trend also is the tendency to constrict, or at least not to provide the process for broadening the kind of Jewish discussion of issues relating to Israel or America, which is necessary to the complexities of this new era. These internal factors appear to be the main threat to Jewish political effectiveness in the foreseeable future. Table 1. Jewish population and voting population. 1955 *. 1982 *. 1982. Jewish population, 1,000% of general population. Jewish population, 1,000% of general population. Percent of voting population EST, general election. New York, 2,410. 15.6. 1872. 10.6. Teen. New Jersey, 280. 5.3. 435. 5.9. 10. District of Columbia, 40. 4.6. 30. 4.8. 8.2. Florida, 84. 2.4. 478. 4.7. Maryland, 91. 3.5. 196. 4.6. 7.8. Massachusetts, 205. 4.1. 249. 4.6. 7.8. Pennsylvania, 355. 3.3. 415. 3.5. 6. Connecticut, 93. 4.2. 102. 3.3. 5.6. California, 430. 3.4. 776. 3.2. 5.4. *. Sources: American Jewish Yearbook. Table 2. The one issue or two which makes the most important difference to me in choosing between the two candidates. Percent keeping church-state separate. Percent supporting Israel. Percent helping the poor. Percent helping the economy. Percent helping the aged. Percent achieving world peace. Percent strong U.S. defense. Percent fighting anti-Semitism. Reagan voters, 180. 26. 1. 54. 2. 32. 30. 4. Mondale voters, 614. 37. 20. 12. 21. 7. 57. 2. 4. Survey sponsored by Northern California Jewish Bulletin. Random samples from among 12,000 reader families. Published March 1985 by the American Jewish Congress. 15 East 84th Street, New York, New York 212-879-4500.